There's something almost mythical about the idea of a child ruler, someone too young to even tie their own sandals, yet entrusted with the spiritual and political fate of an entire civilization. What must it have been like to wake up every morning not as a prince or princess in training, but as a living god hailed by thousands, worshipped by priests, and obeyed by generals? We often picture pharaohs as stern, bearded figures carved in stone. But what about the children who wore the double crown? The ones who hadn't even reached their teenage years, yet held the power of life and death in their small hands. Today, we're stepping into the gilded sandals of an Egyptian child pharaoh, not as observers, but as participants in a world of unimaginable privilege, profound responsibility, and hidden challenges. Close your eyes for a moment and let the sounds of modern life fade away. Instead, hear the gentle, constant flow of the Nile just beyond the palace walls. Smell the incense drifting from the temple courtyards, and feel the cool morning air as servants help you rise from a bed of gold and ebony. You are not just royal, you are divine. From your first conscious moments, you understand that you are Horus incarnate, the mediator between the people and the gods, the one who ensures the Nile floods, the harvests thrive, and the cosmic order is preserved. There is no room for doubt, there is no time for uncertainty, but you are still a child. You still want to play, to laugh, to explore. How you balance the weight of a crown with the lightness of youth. That tension between duty and desire, divinity and humanity is at the heart of one of history's most fascinating stories. In this video, we're going to explore what daily life was truly like for a child pharaoh. We'll walk through the sacred rituals you performed, the education you received, the games you played in shadowed palace halls when no one was watching. We'll uncover the hidden pressures, the political schemes swirling around you, the expectations heaped upon your small shoulders, and the love you may or may not have received from those who saw you not as a son or daughter, but as a symbol. This isn't just a history lesson. It's an invitation to step into a world of awe, inspiring grandeur and intimate struggle, to understand what it meant to be both a god and a child in one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. From the moment you drew your first breath, the air itself crackled with destiny. Your birth wasn't merely a royal occasion, it was a cosmic event, a theological necessity. You were not born a child who would become a god. You were born a god who happened to be a child. The story of your divine origin was woven into the very fabric of your existence, recited by priests and whispered by nurses alike. You were the earthly son of a deity, most commonly the mighty sun god Ra himself, making your right to rule not just a matter of politics or inheritance, but a fundamental truth of the universe. This belief was your first and most important lesson, the bedrock of your entire world. Your name, chosen with immense care and profound spiritual significance, was your first official act as a ruler, even if you were far too young to understand it. It was far more than a simple identifier. It was a declaration of power, a prayer, and a mission statement all in one. It often linked you directly to the pantheon, incorporating elements like Jedefur, which means enduring like Ra, or Merente, beloved of Ptah. To speak your name was to invoke your divine nature and the blessings of the gods you were destined to embody. This name would be carved into monuments, written on papyrus decrees, and spoken in temples for centuries, a constant reminder that your identity was forever intertwined with your role as a living deity. This divine status was reinforced by every single person you encountered. While other infants were cradled by their mothers, you were presented to the court, a tiny figure swaddled in linens finer than any other, your small head already bearing the symbolic weight of the Pishent, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. The nobles did not see a baby, they saw the falcon god Horus, the rightful heir to the throne of Osiris. The high priest saw the continuation of a sacred covenant between the gods and the land of Egypt. Your every gurgle, your first steps, your initial words, all were interpreted as omens and celebrated with elaborate ceremonies. A simple childhood fever wasn't just an illness, it was a potential disruption to the cosmic order, requiring rituals and prayers to appease the gods and restore balance through your small, sacred body. Your family was not a simple unit of parents and siblings in the way we understand it today. You were the center of a vast, powerful, and often perilous web of lineage. Your mother, the great royal wife, was a figure of immense power and respect, her own divinity bolstered by her role as your progenitor. Your father, the previous pharaoh, was now among the gods, a star in the sky you could look to for guidance. But you were also surrounded by aunts, uncles, half-siblings, and cousins, all vying for influence, all seeking a place closer to the source of power. From your earliest days, you learned that trust was a luxury, and that even a warm smile could hide a political ambition. Your nursemaids and tutors were likely chosen not just for their kindness, but for their loyalty to specific factions within the royal court, meaning your most intimate moments were also lessons in statecraft. This environment created a profound and isolating paradox. You were the most important person in the kingdom, yet you belonged to everyone but yourself. Your life was a public spectacle, a continuous performance of divinity for your subjects. The love you received was often conditional, based on your position rather than your person. Did your mother hold you with genuine affection, or was she mindful of her duty to produce a strong heir? Did your tutors praise you for your quick mind, or because flattering the god king was a prudent career move? This constant scrutiny meant the innocent, unfiltered emotions of childhood, a spontaneous laugh, a frustrated tear were often suppressed or channeled into ritualized behavior, molding you into the serene, inscrutable ruler you were always meant to be. Your lineage was your power, your identity, and your gilded cage, all at once. And then came the day that would define every moment that followed your coronation. This was not a celebration of a birthday, it was a cosmic realignment, a series of sacred rituals designed to transform a mortal child into an immortal sovereign. The air in the ceremonial complex was thick with the scent of burning Kai-Fi incense and the palpable fervor of thousands of spectators. You, a small figure draped in layers of ritual linen, were the quiet, bewildered eye of this theological hurricane. The sheer scale of the event would have been overwhelming. The booming voices of the priests, the hypnotic rhythm of sistrums, the sea of faces all turned toward you with a mixture of hope, fear, and devotion. You were the star of a play whose script you were only beginning to learn. The central act of this transformation was the crowning itself. The weight of the Pishent, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, must have been immense both physically and symbolically. Crafted from gold and precious stones, this crown was more than a piece of regalia. It was the very embodiment of the two lands united under your rule. The white Hedjit crown of Upper Egypt and the red Deseret crown of Lower Egypt were fused into one, a heavy, tangible promise that you would protect and rule over a unified kingdom. As it was placed upon your head, the priests would have chanted hymns linking you to the gods, declaring you the heir of Osiris and the living manifestation of Horus. The physical discomfort of bearing that weight would have been a constant, lifelong reminder of the burdens you now carried for your people. Next, you were presented with the crook and the flail, the heka and nekheka. These were not mere props, they were the fundamental instruments of your power. The crook, a shepherd's staff, symbolized your role as the guide and protector of your people, the one who would gently herd them toward prosperity and safety. The flail, an instrument used for threshing grain, represented your authority to provide sustenance, and more grimly, your power to mete out judgment. Clutching these artifacts in your small hands, you became the shepherd and the provider, the nurturer and the judge. Even if you didn't fully comprehend the complexities of statecraft, the objects you held made your duties unmistakably clear. Perhaps the most intense and ancient part of the ceremony was the ritual run, an element borrowed from the Hebsed festival. This was a test of the pharaoh's physical strength and endurance, a demonstration of their vitality that was meant to reassure the entire nation of its continued health and stability. For a child, this would have been a profound challenge. Led by priests, you would have been expected to run a ceremonial course, perhaps between markers symbolizing the borders of your realm. With every step, you were proving your fitness to rule, your divine energy, and your commitment to upholding Maat. The cheers of the crowd would have been deafening, but for you, it might have simply been a desperate, breathless effort to complete the run under the blazing sun, surrounded by adults whose expectations were as vast as the sky. Throughout it all, you were anointed with sacred oils. your skin touched with substances believed to carry the essence of the gods. This anointing was the final seal on your transformation, marking you as the chosen one, set apart from all other humanity. The entire ceremony, from the crowning to the run to the anointing, was meticulously recorded by teams of scribes and artisans. They would capture your image forever idealized as a strong, adult-like ruler on temple walls and stelae, ensuring that this moment of your divine accession would be remembered for eternity. You were now officially the intermediary between the people and the pantheon, the guarantor of the Nile's flood and the nation's bounty. And as the final prayers echoed and the crowds began to disperse, you would have been left with the silent, staggering reality that your childhood was, for all intents and purposes, over. The opulence surrounding you was staggering, yet it was merely the backdrop to a life of rigidly enforced purpose. Your personal suite within the palace was a sanctuary of cool limestone and vibrant color, its walls alive with frescoes depicting gods and goddesses observing your every move. The floor beneath your bare feet was often covered with finely woven mats, and the air was kept fresh and fragrant with bowls of lotus blossoms and simmering pots of frankincense and myrrh. Your bed, a masterpiece of ebony and gold, was not just for rest, it was a site of ritual. Each morning, as the first rays of the sun god Ra pierced the horizon, a carefully selected group of high-ranking servants would enter to help you rise. This was not a gentle waking, but a ceremonial commencement of the day, a reaffirmation of your divine status from the very first moment. Your morning ablutions were a far cry from a simple splash of water. Attendants would pour water over your hands from golden ewers, the liquid infused with precious oils. Another servant would hold a polished bronze mirror, not for vanity, but so you could look upon the face of the God King. The linens chosen for you were the finest in the land, sheer and bleached a brilliant white, and no single piece of clothing was worn twice. Each item you touched, from your sandals to your pectoral necklace bearing the Eye of Horus, was richly purified and charged with protective magic. You were being dressed not just for the day, but for your role as the living embodiment of order against the ever-lurking chaos. Breakfast was another act in this daily performance of divinity. You did not simply eat, you partook of the bounty of the Black Land, a confirmation of Egypt's prosperity under your rule. You would be presented with a selection of delicacies: warm, soft bread, golden honey from the delta, sweet dates, figs, and perhaps a slice of melon. Goat's milk or a light beer, the common drink of the land, would be offered in exquisite alabaster cups. The food itself was served on dishes of faience, painted pottery, or hammered gold, each vessel a work of art. A royal taster would sample everything first, not just to check for poison, but to bless the meal and offer it to the ka, or spirit, of the pharaoh before you consumed it. Even this private moment was a public duty, a ritual ensuring the continued fertility of the Nile Valley. Then came the true work of the day, your education. Your tutors, the most brilliant minds in the kingdom, scribes, priests, and military commanders, arrived according to a strict schedule. Your curriculum was immense, designed to forge you into a master of all things. A priest would drill you in the complex pantheon of gods, the intricate myths, and the precise rituals needed to maintain Mat. You learned the hymns to appease Hapi, the god of the Nile flood, and the prayers to ensure the sun god Ra's successful journey through the underworld each night. A single mispronounced word in a ceremony could, in theory, bring disaster to the entire nation, so the pressure to memorize everything perfectly was immense. A veteran general would then arrive, spreading out maps painted on leather scrolls. He taught you strategy, the geography of your empire and its enemies, the strengths of the chariot corps, and the logistics of supplying an army on the move. You learned to recognize the names of rival kings and the symbols of potentially rebellious vassal states. This was not theoretical. Even as a child, your approval was sought for military deployments, and your divine authority was needed to bless the troops. Your lessons were punctuated by reports from messengers, making the abstract concepts of statecraft immediately, and sometimes frighteningly, real. Perhaps the most difficult skill was mastering the sacred language of hieroglyphs. A senior scribe would guide your hand as you practiced forming the intricate symbols on flakes of limestone or potsherds with a reed brush. You learned the three forms of writing: the formal hieroglyphs for monuments, the quicker hieratic script for religious texts, and the even faster demotic for administrative documents. Mathematics, engineering, and astronomy were also essential. You needed to understand the principles of architecture to approve temple designs, the calendar to set the dates for festivals, and the movements of the stars to align your actions with the heavens. There were no days off, no summer vacations. Your play was often integrated into your lessons, perhaps a strategy game using pieces on a board that mirrored military tactics, ensuring that every waking hour was dedicated to your preparation. Amidst this relentless instruction, you were granted rare moments of respite in the palace gardens, an artificial paradise of date palms, sycamore figs, and tamarisk trees. Here, shaded ponds filled with lotus and papyrus were home to exotic fish and waterfowl. This is one of the few places you could experience a semblance of freedom, though you were never truly alone. Guards stood discreetly at every entrance, and your playmates were the children of high-ranking nobles, chosen as much for their political loyalty as for their companionship. You might practice with a child-sized bow and arrow, or play a spirited game of Senate. But even these activities were watched closely by your tutors for signs of your character, your competitiveness, your patience, your fairness. As the sun began its descent, the pace within the palace shifted from the administrative to the spiritual. Your evening was dominated by rituals. You would be led to a private chapel within the palace complex to make offerings to the gods, incense, libations of milk or beer, and choice cuts of meat. These were not quiet prayers, but elaborate ceremonies with specific chants and gestures. You were the chief priest of every cult in Egypt, and even if the high priests performed the physical actions, your presence and your silent, divine assent were required for the rituals to be valid. The day that began with the ritual bathing ended with the ritual feeding of the gods, a perfect loop of duty that reinforced your role as the sustainer of creation. The scribes assigned to the place of truth, the royal record-keeping office, would have documented your participation in these events, their papyrus scrolls meticulously noting the divine approval you conferred upon the kingdom. Your life was not your own. It was a continuous, sacred performance for an audience of gods and mortals, and the curtain never fell, yet this torrent of information was not delivered through dry lectures. Your tutors, the most revered priests and wisest scribes, were masters of pedagogy, understanding that to teach a god-king, they must engage the mind of a child. Complex lessons in statecraft and diplomacy were woven into captivating stories and strategic board games. A session on economics might involve managing the resources of a miniature estate, using tokens to represent grain, livestock, and gold. You learn the consequences of poor harvests or overtaxation not through scrolls alone, but by seeing your virtual people thrive or suffer based on your decisions. This gamified learning made abstract concepts tangible, allowing you to internalize the delicate balance of power and provision long before you issued your first real decree. Alongside the intellectual came the intensely physical. Your divine role was not merely that of a thinker, but of a warrior and protector, the embodiment of strength who would personally smite the enemies of Egypt. To that end, your afternoons were often dedicated to mastering the arts of war and the hunt. You were taken to vast, sandy courtyards to train with scaled-down, yet fully functional weaponry. A master archer would guide your small hands, teaching you to draw a lightweight bow and aim at targets shaped like Nubian warriors or Asiatic captives. Each arrow released was a symbolic act of defending your kingdom, reinforcing your identity as the nation's foremost defender. Chariot driving was another essential, albeit terrifying, skill. You would learn to command a pair of horses from a lightweight, scaled-down version of the feared Egyptian war chariot, a teacher running alongside you, shouting instructions over the thunder of hooves and the rattle of wheels. The goal was to achieve perfect control to be able to navigate tight turns, fire arrows from an unstable platform, and project an aura of invincible power. These were not frivolous pastimes. They were critical rehearsals for your future role leading military campaigns and participating in the sacred hunt, a ritual that demonstrated your vigor and your command over the chaotic forces of nature. Even your leisure was a form of training. The board game of Senate, popular across all levels of Egyptian society, was a particular favorite in the palace. But for you, it was far more than a game of chance. Its movement across 30 squares was deeply symbolic, representing the soul's journey through the underworld, facing challenges, and ultimately achieving resurrection. Priests might use the game to explain the complex theology of the afterlife, while military advisors could use strategic elements to discuss campaign logistics. Every thrown stick dice became a lesson in fate, strategy, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos, ensuring that your education continued even in moments of apparent play. This relentless curriculum was administered by a rotating court of tutors, each a specialist who saw your mastery as their highest calling. The priest tutor, often a high-ranking lector priest, was responsible for your spiritual and moral development, ensuring you could recite the correct hymns and understood the subtle nuances of maintaining math. The scribe tutor drilled you in the three forms of writing until your hand could effortlessly form the precise curves of a hieroglyph and the quick, efficient strokes of hieratic script. The military commander, a grizzled veteran, perhaps missing a finger or bearing a proud scar, taught you to read battle maps and understand the strengths of your army's divisions, the infantry, the archers, the devastating chariot corps. Their methods were a blend of reverence and rigid expectation. They would kneel in your presence, acknowledging your divinity, but they would also not hesitate to correct a poorly drawn character or a flawed strategic assumption. This created a strange dynamic. You were a god to be obeyed, but also a student to be molded. Their success was measured by your competence, and their lives and the stability of the kingdom depended on it. They were your teachers, your protectors, and in many ways, your first and most important advisors, the architects of the ruler you would become. But the true heart of your divine work lay not in the palace, but in the temple. As the sun reached its zenith, you would be prepared for the most critical part of your day, the daily temple ritual. This was not a weekly service or a monthly obligation. It was a daily necessity, as vital to Egypt's survival as the rising of the sun. Dressed in a leopard skin mantle, the garment of a high priest, you would be led in a solemn procession toward the inner sanctum of the god's temple, perhaps dedicated to the king of the gods, Amun-Ra. The journey itself was a progression from the noisy, sun-drenched world into a silent, sacred darkness. You would move through towering pylons, past vast courtyards filled with chanting priests, and into the hypostyle hall, its forest of massive columns carved with hieroglyphs that told stories of creation and power. The air grew cooler and heavier with the scent of millennia of incense as you approached the Holy of Holies, the Naus. This is where the statue of the god resided, a figure crafted from precious metals and stones, believed to house the deity's very spirit. Only you, as the pharaoh, had the divine right to enter this space and serve the god directly. In reality, the high priests performed the physical rituals on your behalf every single day, but on major festivals and at key moments, you were expected to be present, to be the conduit for the ceremony. As a child, you would be carefully guided through each step, your small hands placed on the ritual instruments by a senior priest who whispered the correct words for you to repeat. The ritual itself was a precise and intimate series of actions. You would first break the clay seal on the shrine's doors, a symbolic act of opening the way to the divine. Then, you would kneel and present offerings. You might offer a finely carved tray of the finest roast meat, baskets of figs and grapes, loaves of white bread, and jars of beer and wine, the very best of the land's bounty, returned to the god who provided it. You would raise a golden censer, swinging it so that the thick, sweet smoke of frankincense purified the statue and carry your prayers to the heavens. With the ceremonial ads, you might perform the opening of the mouth ritual, a ceremony that symbolically animated the statue, allowing the god to see, hear, and consume the essence of the offerings. The meaning behind these actions was profound. This was not simply about feeding a statue, it was about sustaining the cosmos. The Egyptians believed the gods required these daily offerings of sustenance to maintain their strength to keep the universe functioning. By performing this ritual, you were literally feeding Amun-Ra, giving him the strength to rise again the next morning. You were ensuring the sun would cross the sky, the Nile would flood its banks, and chaos would be held at bay. A single missed ritual or an incorrectly recited spell was believed to risk plunging the entire world into darkness and disorder. This immense weight rested on your small shoulders every single day. Your role exploded onto the public stage during the great festivals, which were less solemn ceremonies and more massive, city-wide explosions of joy, faith, and political theater. The most spectacular of these was the Opet Festival. For this, you would travel to Thebes, where the great temples of Karnak and Luxor stood. The festival began with you leading a procession to the sacred barks, the portable shrines that held the statues of Ammon, his wife Mut, and their son Khonsu. These barks were then lifted onto the shoulders of dozens of priests, creating a river of gold and color that flowed from Karnak Temple down the Avenue of Sphinxes toward Luxor Temple. You would walk at the head of this divine parade, your presence confirming the bond between the royal house and the god. The streets would be lined with thousands of your subjects, cheering, dancing, and singing hymns, overwhelmed by the sight of their god-king and the deities he served. The noise was deafening. Drums, sistrums, trumpets, and the roar of the crowd created an exhilarating, almost overwhelming wave of sound and emotion. For a child, this could be both terrifying and empowering. You were the focal point of this entire ecstatic celebration, the living proof that the gods were pleased with Egypt. The culmination of the festival took place within the deepest chambers of Luxor Temple. Here, in a secret ritual, your own divine essence was believed to be renewed and strengthened through your union with the god Ammon. This mystical regeneration was essential, as it reaffirmed your divine right to rule and your magical power to guarantee the fertility and prosperity of the land for another year. The Opet Festival was the ultimate performance of your kingship, a vibrant, deafening, and physically demanding spectacle that left no doubt in anyone's mind you were not just a ruler, but a vital, pulsating force of nature itself. This constant oscillation between the silent, dark solitude of the daily ritual and the deafening, colorful public spectacle of the festivals defined your existence. In the temple's inner sanctum, it was just you and the god, a relationship of intense, quiet responsibility. In the festival crowd, you were the symbol for an entire nation, a beacon of their collective hope and faith. There was no time for a typical childhood. Your play was practice for ritual, your education was memorization of sacred texts, and your rest was constantly interrupted by the demands of your station. You learned to wear the mask of serene divinity at all times, to internalize the hymns until they felt like your own thoughts, and to understand that your every action, no matter how small, was a thread in the vast tapestry of cosmic order. Your youth was not lost, but it was utterly transformed, sacrificed to the immense and beautiful responsibility of holding the world together. Yet for all the divine ritual and intense education, the true engine of the empire was not powered by prayer alone, but by the complex and often ruthless machine of politics. As a child pharaoh, you were the ultimate source of authority, the sun around which the entire court revolved, but the actual exercise of that power was a delicate and dangerous dance. The reality was that while your signature, your royal cartouche, was required on every decree, from levying taxes to declaring war, the hand that often guided the brush was not your own. True, day-to-day control of the kingdom typically rested with a regent, a powerful figure who ruled in your name until you came of age. This regent was the most important person in your life, a surrogate ruler whose character and ambition would define your early reign. Often, this was your mother, the Queen Dowager. As a royal woman who had produced a divine heir, her own status was immensely elevated. She was not just a grieving widow, but a formidable political operator, fiercely motivated to protect your throne and, by extension, her own power from any and all rivals. Her influence over you was total. She would interpret the advice of generals, listen to the reports of viziers, and then counsel you on the appropriate response. Your relationship with her was a confusing blend of a mother's affection and a king's duty, and learning to distinguish between her loving advice and her political maneuvering was one of your first and hardest lessons in leadership. Alternatively, the regent could be a high priest of Ammon, a man whose religious authority rivaled your own, or the vizier, the chief administrator of the entire kingdom. This vizier was the CEO of ancient Egypt, responsible for everything from the grain stores in the royal silos to the judges in the law courts. He would stand before you each day, presenting a constant stream of problems: a failed harvest in the Fayum, a trade dispute with Byblos, rumors of unrest among the Nubian garrison. You were expected to listen, to understand, and to approve his proposed solutions. In these council meetings, seated on a throne that was too large for you, you witnessed the raw mechanics of power. You saw how seasoned advisors debated, how they used logic and flattery to win arguments, and how their eyes would always flicker to you, the child god whose whispered yes or no could change the fate of thousands. This system, while necessary, was a breeding ground for intrigue. The royal court was not a united family, but a snake pit of competing factions, all vying for your ear and, by extension, control of the state. The military generals would push for more aggressive foreign policy, wanting glory and the plunder of war. The high priests would advocate for greater resources to be funneled to the temples, strengthening their own institutions. The noble families would jostle to have their daughters placed in your household, hoping to forge a blood tie to the next generation. You learned to read the subtle signs of these power struggles: a carefully veiled insult between council members, a gift that was slightly too extravagant, a report that conveniently omitted key information. Your childhood became a masterclass in strategy and suspicion, where learning whom to trust was a matter of life and death. The story of the boy King Tutankhamun stands as the most famous example of this precarious dance. He ascended the throne at the incredibly young age of 8 or 9, following the chaotic reign of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten. The kingdom was in disarray, its traditional religious foundations shattered. Tutankhamun, then named Tutankhaten, was in no position to repair this damage alone. Real power lay firmly in the hands of 2 regents, the elder vizier, I, a seasoned politician who had served under previous pharaohs, and the general Hormheb, the commander of the army. It was undoubtedly these 2 men who orchestrated the great counter-reformation, guiding the young king to restore the old gods, abandon the city of Akhenaten, and return power to the priesthood of Amun. Every decree issued in Tutankhamun's name, every statue carved with his youthful features, was a product of their calculated political strategy. He was the face of the restoration while they held the reins. This constant state of guided rule created a profound internal conflict. You were told from birth that you were a god, omnipotent and all-seeing, yet your every decision was questioned, shaped, or outright made by the adults around you. This could foster a deep-seated frustration, a burning desire to prove your own capability and seize the authority that was your divine right. The gradual shift of power as you matured was therefore a tense and volatile process. A regent who had grown accustomed to absolute control was often reluctant to relinquish it. The moment you began to question their advice, to propose your own solutions, or to favor a different set of advisors marked a critical turning point in your reign. This was when you stopped being a symbol and started becoming a sovereign, a transition that was as dangerous as any military campaign. Your physical well-being was never considered a private matter. It was a concern of national security, a vital component of Egypt's stability. A sick pharaoh was a direct threat to Mat, a sign that the cosmic balance was tipping toward chaos. To safeguard you, you were surrounded by the most advanced medical minds of the ancient world, the royal physician. These men were not merely doctors, they were priest scholars, masters of a complex system that saw no distinction between the physical and the spiritual causes of illness. Their approach was a fascinating, and sometimes effective, blend of empirical observation and powerful magic. A typical examination was a holistic event. The chief physician, a man who held immense prestige, would begin by carefully observing you. He would note the color of your skin and eyes, the quality of your breath, and your overall demeanor. He might palpate your stomach or examine a wound, his touch practiced and sure, but his diagnosis would extend far beyond the visible. He would consult a papyrus scroll filled with precise anatomical knowledge and detailed descriptions of ailments, from fevers and fractures to digestive complaints. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, for instance, shows us they understood the function of the heart as a pump and could suture wounds with remarkable skill. Their practical treatments were often ingenious. They used honey, a natural antibiotic on wounds, applied moldy bread, a sort of penicillin, to infections, and prescribed aloe vera for skin conditions. Yet, for every physical treatment, there was a spiritual counterpart. The physician believed that many illnesses, especially sudden fevers or mysterious pains, were caused by hostile spirits, the anger of a god, or the curse of an enemy. A severe headache wasn't just a headache. It could be the work of a demon that needed to be driven out. To combat this, the physician would also function as a magician. He might recite spells from a sacred text, fashion a protective amulet for you to wear, or prepare a concoction of herbs and minerals that was potent not just for its chemical properties, but for the magical words spoken over it during its preparation. Your treatment was always a two-pronged assault: medicine for the body and magic for the spirit, ensuring every possible angle was covered to restore your divine health. This constant vigilance extended to everything that passed your lips. Your diet was a curated masterpiece of luxury and safety, designed to both showcase the kingdom's bounty and protect its most important asset. At the heart of every meal was bread and beer, the twin staples of Egyptian life, but yours were crafted from the finest ingredients by palace bakers and brewers. Your bread was made from emmer wheat, often sweetened with dates or figs, and baked into a dozen different shapes. Your beer was a thick, nutritious, and slightly sweet concoction, far less alcoholic than modern versions, and it was a safer drink than water from the Nile. The variety of food presented to you was astounding, a testament to the reach of the royal kitchens. You would be offered plates of fresh lettuce, cucumbers, onions, and leeks vegetables believed to have aphrodisiac and health-giving properties. Bowls of figs, dates, grapes, and pomegranates were always within reach. Fish, plentiful from the Nile, was a common protein, meticulously deboned and roasted or boiled. Rarer treats like duck, goose, or even beef from specially reared cattle appeared during festivals and feasts. Every ingredient was inspected, and every dish was prepared with an obsessive focus on purity. Water for your consumption was always strained through linen cloth to remove silt and visible impurities before being served in a golden cup. You ate the best of the best, but you never had the simple, carefree joy of choosing your own meal or tasting something from a street vendor. Your nourishment was a controlled, ceremonial act. Despite this wall of protection, you were not invincible. The shadow of childhood illness loomed large over the gilded halls of the palace. The Nile, the source of all life, was also a breeding ground for parasites and waterborne diseases like dysentery. Mosquitoes swarmed in the marshes, carrying the deadly threat of malaria, whose fevers could ravage a child's body in days. A simple cut could lead to a fatal infection, and respiratory illnesses could quickly turn into pneumonia. The physicians, for all their knowledge, had no understanding of germs or viruses. Their most potent spells and finest honey could do little against these invisible killers. History is tragically littered with the stories of young rulers who succumbed. The most poignant example remains Tutankhamun. Modern CT scans of his mummy reveal a young man riddled with ailments, a clubbed foot that would have caused him to walk with a cane, a recently broken leg, and most devastatingly, evidence of a severe case of malaria. It's likely that a combination of these factors, a weakened body from genetic disorders and a shattered immune system from the mosquito-borne disease, led to his premature death before he reached the age of 20. His story is a stark reminder that all the gold in Egypt, all the prayers of the priests, and all the skills of the physicians could not guarantee the survival of a child pharaoh. Your life, for all its divine grandeur, was as fragile as any other, a truth that must have hung in the air like a silent prayer in the opulent rooms where you slept, ate, and performed the endless work of a god. Your clothing was a language in itself, a silent yet thunderous declaration of your divinity and power, woven into every fiber and fastened with every jewel. The primary material was linen, but this was no ordinary cloth. It was harvested from the finest flax, woven by teams of skilled artisans into a fabric so sheer it was often described as woven air. In a land where the sun reigned supreme, this lightness was practical, but its quality was a direct indicator of status. The linen worn by commoners was coarse and thick. Yours was almost transparent, gossamer thin, and bleached to a brilliant, celestial white that shimmered under the Egyptian sun. A single garment could use linen thread so fine it took months to produce, and the pleating was an art form, tiny, precise accordion folds that were set using gum, Arabic, and starch, creating a texture that rustled softly with your every move, a sound that announced your presence before you even entered a room. The iconic symbol everyone associates with a pharaoh is the Nemes headcloth, that striped blue and gold cloth that frames the face and hangs down over the shoulders. This was not something you wore every day, it was ceremonial armor, crafted from striped cloth, often with bands of blue and gold representing lapis lazuli and the imperishability of gold. It was molded to the head and tied tightly in the back. 2 lappets fell forward over your chest, and Urius, a rearing cobra made of gold and precious stones, was fixed to the brow. This serpent was not merely decorative, it was the fiery eye of the sun god Ra, a magical protector poised to spit venom at any enemy who dared threaten you. Wearing the Nemes was an act of transformation. It hid your human hair, framing your face in a way that was both majestic and strangely impersonal, making you appear less like a person and more like the living statue of a god. But your divine identity was most powerfully communicated through your jewelry. This was not simple adornment, it was a portable treasury and a magical arsenal. The most magnificent piece was the broad collar, a massive, multi-stranded necklace that covered your entire chest from your collarbone to your sternum. It was a symphony of craftsmanship, composed of hundreds of individual beads of gold, carnelian, turquoise, and deep blue lapis lazuli, a stone imported from thousands of miles away, its cost unimaginable. The weight of it was substantial, a constant, physical reminder of the wealth and reach of the kingdom you embodied. These collars were not just beautiful, their patterns often mimic floral designs, symbolizing rebirth and regeneration, and they were believed to emit a protective, fragrant aura around your person. Your fingers would be laden with rings, but these were not simple bands. They were intricate masterpieces of the goldsmith's art, often featuring scarabs carved from gemstones. The scarab beetle, Keper, was a potent symbol of transformation and rebirth, as it was believed to push the sun across the sky each day. Wearing it on your hand was a way of aligning yourself with this eternal cosmic cycle. Armlets, bracelets, and anklets of heavy gold, inlaid with cloisonné patterns of gods and goddesses, encircled your limbs. Every piece served a dual purpose, to dazzle the eye with a display of unimaginable wealth and to magically safeguard the body of the god king. Amulets were sewn into the very hems of your garments or hung on golden threads around your neck. The most important was the wedget, the eye of Horus. This symbol of the healed eye of the god Horus was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a powerful protective talisman, guarding you against evil spirits, illness, and misfortune on the physical and spiritual level. Even in more relaxed, private settings within the palace, your attire was never truly casual. You might exchange the heavy broad collar for a lighter necklace of faience beads, and the pleated linen sheath or kilt would be simpler, but it was still of a quality and fineness that no noble could ever hope to possess. The message was constant and clear. There was no moment, public or private, where you were not the pharaoh. Your clothing was your uniform, your armor, and your divine skin, all in one. It set you apart, making you a being so elevated that even the most powerful courtiers could only aspire to emulate a fraction of your splendor. Yet even with every moment dedicated to your sacred purpose, you were still, in your heart, a child. The human spirit, especially a young one, instinctively seeks moments of lightness and joy, and yours was no exception. Carved into the strict schedule of your day were precious pockets of time reserved for play, a necessary respite that your caretakers understood was vital for your well-being. These weren't mere distractions. They were carefully curated activities that blended amusement with subtle lessons in leadership, strategy, and the cultural values you were destined to uphold. In these rare moments of freedom, the weight of the double crown felt just a little bit lighter. The toys that filled your chambers were simple in form but exquisite in craftsmanship, reflecting your immense status. Artisans carved spinning tops from rare ebony and ivory, their surfaces inlaid with delicate patterns that would create a hypnotic swirl as they turned. You might have a collection of wooden animals, crocodiles with movable jaws, lions with articulated legs that could be used to act out great hunts or mythical stories. There were even balls made from stitched leather, stuffed with papyrus reeds, for games of catch in the palace gardens. For a young pharaoh, these objects were more than playthings. They were miniature versions of the world you were to rule, allowing you to explore concepts of movement, competition, and storytelling in a safe, controlled environment. No game was more revered or more deeply woven into the fabric of your existence than Senet. This board game, played on a grid of 30 squares, was a national obsession enjoyed by peasants and princes alike. But for you, it held a significance far beyond simple entertainment. The intricate symbolism of the game was a direct reflection of the Egyptian belief in the afterlife. The squares represented the soul's perilous journey through the underworld, facing challenges and ultimately striving for resurrection into the field of reeds. As you moved your pieces, often beautifully carved tokens of jackals or lions by throwing casting sticks, you weren't just trying to win, you were rehearsing for your own eventual voyage into the afterlife. Priests might even observe your play, noting your reactions to setbacks and your strategies for overcoming obstacles, seeing it as a window into your character and your understanding of the divine journey. Beyond the palace walls, your play took on a more physical and adventurous tone. The private royal pools and canals, designed to keep the palace complex cool, also served as your personal playground. On a scorching afternoon, you could escape the formality of the court and plunge into the refreshing, lotus-filled water, a moment of sheer, uninhibited joy. In the vast, sandy courtyards, you would practice with a child-sized bow, aiming at painted targets. This was play, but it was also a critical rehearsal for your future role as the nation's foremost hunter and military leader, honing the hand-eye coordination and focus you would need to lead chariots into battle. The palace was also alive with sounds that offered a different kind of escape. Court musicians, playing harps, lutes, and rhythmic sistrums, would perform soothing melodies. Storytellers, masters of their craft, would captivate you with epic tales of gods and heroes, of Ra's journey across the sky and the battle between Horus and Set. These narratives were more than just bedtime stories. They were the foundational myths of your culture, lessons in morality, loyalty, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos, delivered in their most engaging and memorable form. In these moments, curled up on a cushion, you could simply be an audience member, transported by the power of a well-told tale, and then there were the animals. The Egyptians shared a deep, affectionate bond with creatures great and small, and as pharaoh, you had access to the most exotic pets. A sleek, graceful cat might curl up at the foot of your bed, revered for its grace and its ability to kill venomous snakes. More playful companions, like monkeys brought from the land of Punt, could provide endless amusement with their antics. These animals offered a unique form of companionship, one that was free from political ambition, flattery, or the pressure of expectation. Their unconditional presence provided a rare and precious glimpse of normalcy, a silent, loving connection in a world otherwise defined by ritual and duty. In these simple, joyful interactions, the divine ruler could, for a few precious moments, simply be a child. The concept of a simple, loving family is perhaps the most profound sacrifice you would make as a child pharaoh. Your relationships were not bonds of affection, but intricate political alliances, each one a carefully weighted piece on the Grand Senate Board of State. Your father, the previous king, was a distant, godlike figure even in life, and in death, he became a star in the celestial expanse, a spirit you were expected to commune with in rituals, not a parent you could mourn in private. Your true family was the dynasty itself, a living institution where bloodlines were tools for securing power, and every interaction was layered with unspoken ambition and potential danger. Siblings were a particular source of both companionship and tension. You likely had many, born to your father by his chief queen and a host of secondary wives and concubines. These brothers and sisters were your only true peers, the only others who understood the bizarre reality of your gilded existence. You might have trained together, played Senate in the gardens, and shared complaints about strict tutors. Yet, this camaraderie existed in the shadow of the succession, in a system where the heir was not always the eldest son, but the child deemed most fit, or the one whose mother held the most sway. Every capable sibling was a potential rival. A charismatic brother could become the focus of a faction of disgruntled nobles, An ambitious sister could leverage her influence to advance the prospects of her own children. The playmate you laughed with one day could, with a shift in political winds, become the claimant to the throne you had to discreetly neutralize the next. The most pivotal and powerful figure in your life was almost certainly your mother, the great royal wife and queen dowager. Women like the formidable Tiye, wife of Amenhotep III, or the famously influential Nefertiti, were not merely royal ornaments, they were master politicians, diplomats, and power brokers. As a young child on the throne, your mother would have immediately assumed the role of regent, ruling in your name until you came of age. Her guidance was your first and most important education in statecraft. She would sit beside you during meetings with the vizier, her calm presence a shield against those who might seek to manipulate you. She would interpret the complex advice of generals, her sharp mind discerning the true motives behind their words. Her network of spies and informants was likely the best in the kingdom, making her the eyes and ears you desperately needed. Her love for you was real, but it was inextricably linked to her fierce determination to protect your reign, and by extension, her own power and legacy. Then, there was the matter of your own queen. For a pharaoh, marriage was rarely about love. It was the most important diplomatic tool available. To secure a political alliance, you might be married to a princess from a foreign power, a Mitanni or Hittite princess brought to your court to cement a treaty. But more often than not, your chief wife would be much closer to home. To keep the sacred bloodline pure and concentrate power within the family, you were expected to marry a royal sister or a half-sister. This practice, known as royal incest, was a theological statement as much as a political one. It mirrored the gods themselves. Osiris married his sister Isis and created a ruling couple so divine, so set apart from ordinary humanity that they were almost a separate species. Imagine the profound complexity of this relationship. The girl who was your playmate, your confidante, the one you squabbled and giggled with, suddenly became your wife, your queen, and the mother of your heirs. The dynamics of your childhood were irrevocably altered, layered with the immense pressure of political expectation and religious duty. You were both incredibly young, tasked with the terrifying responsibility of producing a male heir to continue the dynastic line, all while navigating the treacherous currents of court politics together. Your relationship was a partnership forged in the most intensive circumstances, a bond that could become your greatest source of strength or your most devastating vulnerability, depending on the loyalty and character of the person now sharing your throne. This web of familial politics meant that trust was the rarest and most valuable commodity in the palace. A smile could hide a plot, a gift could carry poison, a word of advice could be designed to lead you astray. You learned to school your features into the serene mask of the God King, to keep your own counsel, and to measure every word before it left your lips, even with those who shared your blood. The people you were told to call family were the same ones you had to scrutinize with the most caution. Your heart might yearn for the simple, unconditional love of a parent or the loyal camaraderie of a sibling, but your station demanded you see them first as political actors. This constant, exhausting vigilance was the price of survival, ensuring that your most personal relationships were also your most complex and perilous negotiation. Despite the immense political power you wielded, one of your most critical roles was that of commander-in-chief of Egypt's armies. While the image of a child leading a chariot charge into battle is a dramatic one, the reality was far more nuanced and strategically vital. Your youth and sacred status meant you were far too valuable to risk on the front lines, but your presence was required everywhere else. Your involvement was less about direct combat and more about embodying the very spirit of victory itself, serving as the divine spark that ignited the courage of your troops and ensured the favor of the gods for their campaign. Your introduction to this world began not on a dusty battlefield, but in the royal armory, a hall echoing with the smell of oiled leather and polished wood. Here, master craftsmen would present you with your personal arsenal, each piece a masterpiece of both art and function. You were given a scale model shield, a lighter version of the massive infantry shields made of wood covered in animal hide, and a ceremonial dagger with a blade of gleaming bronze and a hilt of gold inlaid with lapis lazuli. Most importantly, you received a child-sized composite bow, a powerful weapon crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew. The act of stringing this bow required significant strength, a physical test that symbolized your readiness to assume your martial duties. Holding these weapons, you learn their weight and balance, understanding that they were not mere symbols, but the actual tools by which Egypt's safety was maintained. Your most visible military function was as the central figure in grand parades and victory celebrations. Before a campaign, you would stand before the assembled troops, a small but resplendent figure clad in the blue war crown, the kepresh, and holding the crook and flail. The sight of their god-king, gleaming in gold and fine linen, was designed to fill every soldier with unwavering confidence. You were the living proof that the gods of Egypt marched with them. After a successful campaign, you were the one to whom the spoils of war were presented. You would watch as lines of captured foreign chieftains, their hands bound, were forced to kneel and beg for mercy at your feet. Baskets overflowing with gold rings, ingots of copper and tin, and exotic goods like ebony and ivory were laid before you. In these carefully orchestrated spectacles, you didn't need to have fought. Your divine presence was the reason for the victory, and the entire performance was designed to reinforce that belief among the soldiers and the populace. Behind the scenes, your military education was intense and practical. The veteran General Hormheb, or a commander like him, would spread large leather maps across the floor of a sunlit chamber in the palace. Using small, carved pieces of ivory to represent companies of infantry, chariots, and ships, he would walk you through hypothetical battles and real strategic dilemmas. "See here, Horus on earth," he might say, pointing to a fortification along the Sinai border. "If the Shasu nomads attack this trade route, do we send the chariots to chase them into the desert, or do we fortify the wells and wait for them to come to us?" These were not abstract games. Your reasoned answer, guided by his expertise, could become actual military policy. You learned to think like a commander, considering terrain, supply lines, and the psychology of your enemies long before you were ever expected to set foot in a war council. When it was safe and logistically feasible, you were taken to witness the army in action. You might be brought to a training ground near the capital to observe new recruits drilling in formation, their synchronized movements kicking up clouds of dust under the relentless sun. The air would be filled with the sound of marching feet, the crack of practice arrows hitting straw targets, and the thunder of chariot wheels. Your presence at these exercises was a powerful morale booster for the soldiers. For them, seeing their pharaoh, even a young one, taking a genuine interest in their training was a profound honor. It transformed a routine drill into a sacred duty, reinforcing their loyalty not to a distant sovereign, but to a leader who was investing in their strength. The ultimate expression of your military role, however, was in the art that covered temple walls and public monuments. Here, the boundaries of reality were stretched to their theological limits. Artists depicted you not as a child, but as a muscular, adult-sized giant, towering over your enemies. In these grand reliefs, you are shown standing proudly in your chariot, your bow drawn, and your hair flowing beneath the blue war crown, single-handedly smiting entire armies of hapless Nubians or Asiatic. This is propaganda of the highest order, a visual narrative told to every citizen who passed by. It didn't matter that you had never been within 100 miles of the actual conflict. The art declared that through your divine will, the victory was achieved. The message was clear. The strength of the army was an extension of the strength of the pharaoh, and the pharaoh was a god. This artistic tradition not only glorified your reign, but also served as a stern warning to any who might consider challenging the might of Egypt. Through reports from fast-moving messengers and detailed dispatches from your generals, you were kept intimately aware of the realities of warfare, even from the palace. You learned of the hardships soldiers faced: the scorching heat of the desert, the damp misery of delta marshes, the terror of facing an unknown enemy. You approved tactics and celebrated victories, but you also learned of the costs. The vizier would present you with lists of the dead, their names followed by the amount of grain and silver to be given to their families as compensation. This was a sobering lesson in the human price of expansion and defense, teaching you that every strategic decision you made had a tangible, and often tragic, consequence for the people you were destined to rule. This unique position gave you a comprehensive education in the machinery of war, from its glorious public celebrations to its grim private costs, preparing you for the day you would truly command. Beneath the golden rituals and military strategies, the true lifeblood of the kingdom was its economy, a vast and intricate system that you, as pharaoh, were ultimately responsible for sustaining. While your days were filled with spiritual duties, a significant portion of your education was dedicated to understanding the less glamorous, but utterly vital, concepts of agriculture, taxation, and trade. The vizier, your chief administrator, would present you with detailed reports not on enemy movements, but on the water levels of the Nile at the Nilometer in Elephantine. This was the most critical data in the entire kingdom, more important than any military intelligence. The height of the annual flood predicted the bounty of the harvest, which in turn dictated the nation's wealth, the size of the tax intake, and whether your people would feast or face famine in the coming year. You learned to interpret these numbers with the gravity of a high priest reading an omen, for they were a direct measure of Maat under your reign. Your advisors would bring you samples of the very wealth you govern. A scribe from the treasury might pour a handful of golden grain from a sack onto a low table before you, its value far exceeding that of gold for the average Egyptian. You were taught to recognize the quality of emmer wheat and barley, to understand the difference between a good harvest and a poor one. Another official would present ingots of copper and turquoise from the mines of Sinai, or a heavy, dark lump of iron from meteorite, a metal so rare it was called the iron of the sky and reserved for the most sacred of ceremonial daggers. You held a piece of Nubian gold, the foundation of your kingdom's international prestige, and smelled the rich, fragrant logs of cedar that had traveled all the way from the forests of Lebanon to become the grand pillars of your palaces and the sacred barks of your god. These tangible objects transformed abstract economic principles into a physical reality you could touch and hold. Tax collection was the engine that powered the state, and it was conducted not in coin, but in kind. Artists would show you detailed paintings of the process. Scribes with their palettes would fan out across the countryside after the harvest, meticulously measuring each farmer's yield with ropes and calculating their required contribution. The taxes, a portion of their grain, livestock, or crafted goods, were transported to vast state granaries and warehouses that you owned. Your vizier would explain how the stored wealth was then redistributed. It fed your massive army and the thousands of laborers building your tomb and temples. It paid the salaries of your officials in bread, beer, and linen. It served as a national emergency fund to be dispersed in times of poor harvest. A decision you made about tax rates, even if guided by your regent, could mean the difference between a prosperous village and an abandoned one, making you the ultimate arbiter of your people's daily sustenance. Trade was your connection to the wider world, a delicate dance of diplomacy and commerce managed by highly skilled officials. The vizier would spread out maps showing the labyrinthine routes of international exchange. You learned about the treacherous sea voyages to the fabled land of Punt, from where your ships returned laden with mertrees, ebony, ivory, and live monkeys to amuse the court. You were schooled in the overland routes through the Sinai, where donkeys carried oil and wine to trade for Canaanite copper, and the caravan trails that brought lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan to adorn your broad collars. Your advisors would negotiate these deals in your name, offering Egyptian gold, papyrus, and linen in exchange for the luxuries that define your divine status. Every pot of kohl eyeliner from Galena, every jar of Syrian wine, and every leopard skin from Nubia was a testament to the economic power you wielded and the vast network that saw Egypt as the center of the civilized world. Your engagement with this system was constant. You were presented with clay seals that had been broken off storage jars in your name, symbolizing your ownership of their contents. You approved the allocations of wood to the shipyards and grain to the royal workshops where artisans crafted the furniture for your palaces. A decree from you could authorize a state-sponsored mining expedition or a trade mission, sending hundreds of men into the desert or across the sea to secure the resources that maintain your court's splendor and the kingdom's stability. The economic health of Egypt was the clearest reflection of your successful maintenance of Maat. A full granary and a bustling marketplace were signs that the gods were pleased. The Nile was flooding as it should, and the living God on the throne was fulfilling his cosmic duty. The weight of the gold collar around your neck was a constant reminder that its beauty was underwritten by the endless, flowing river of grain, gold, and goods that you were divinely appointed to manage. Yet for all their spiritual and political significance, your building projects were not acts of solitary genius. They were the product of a vast state-run machine of industry, a symphony of coordinated labor that showcased the organizational genius of your administration. The man at the center of this machine was your chief architect, a figure who held a position of immense trust and prestige, a modern-day Imhotep. This master builder was more than a designer. He was a high priest of art, a mathematician, and a logistical wizard. He would come before you with plans drawn on gridded papyrus or etched onto a smooth limestone flake, walking you through the proportions of a new pylon gate or the precise alignment of a columned hall to capture the first ray of the sun on the new year. You would learn from him the sacred geometry that governed all construction, the ratios that pleased the gods, and the practicalities of quarrying and transporting mammoth blocks of stone. Your involvement was ceremonial but crucial. Before a single stone could be laid, you would travel to the site to perform the sacred foundation ritual, the pageantry. Dressed in your full regalia, you would kneel to dig the first furrow in the earth with a wooden hoe, an act that connected you to the primordial moment of creation when the mound of earth first emerged from the waters of chaos. You would then carefully lay the foundation, deposit small ritual objects like model tools, food offerings, and inscribed plaques in the trenches that marked the building's corners, symbolically offering the structure to the gods and asking for their blessing. This act of consecration transformed the construction site from a mere workplace into a sacred precinct, and your divine presence infused the very ground with purpose. The scale of labor required was breathtaking. A single project like a new temple could employ thousands of men, all organized into highly specialized crews. There were the quarrymen who worked the limestone beds at Tura and the granite quarries at Aswan, their skilled hands knowing exactly how to drill and wedge blocks from the living rock. There were the scribes who kept meticulous count of every block extracted, every tool issued, every ration of bread and beer distributed from the state warehouses. Armies of laborers would haul these colossal stones on wooden sledges, pouring water onto the sand to reduce friction, their coordinated efforts moving mountains of stone to the rhythm of chanting and drumming. On site, the master craftsmen took over, the stonemasons who squared the blocks with copper chisels and stone hammers, the sculptors who carved the intricate hieroglyphs and reliefs, and the painters who brought it all to life with vibrant pigments made from ground minerals. A visit to one of these bustling sites was a sensory overload. The air rang with the constant, rhythmic tap of metal on stone, and the grating sound of saws cutting through granite with the help of abrasive sand. Dust hung in the air, mingling with the smell of sweat, baking bread from the on-site ovens, and the sharp scent of the acacia wood used for scaffolding. You would be carried through this organized chaos on a litter, observing the progress, perhaps pausing to watch a team of workers maneuver a multi-ton obelisk into its vertical position using earthen ramps and raw muscle. The site was a powerful reminder of your kingdom's, might not just its military strength, but its ability to command and organize human endeavor on a monumental scale. These workers were not slaves in chains, but often skilled, state-employed artisans who took great pride in their work, living in special villages like Deir el-Medina with their families, supported by the very system they were building. And what were they building? Your legacy, carved in stone for eternity. Every temple wall was a canvas for your divine narrative. Artists would depict you in the classic smiting pose, towering over foreign enemies, presenting offerings to the gods, or being crowned by the deities themselves. These were not simple decorations. They were permanent, unchanging statements of your power and piety, designed to be read by gods and mortals for thousands of years. The hieroglyphic inscriptions that accompanied them did not credit the architects or the artists. They proclaimed that you, and you alone, had commissioned this magnificent work as a gift to the gods, a testament to your eternal rule. Your name, enclosed within a royal cartouche, was repeated hundreds of times across the stone, ensuring that your essence would be remembered and invoked forever. In a very real sense, to build was to achieve a form of immortality, to create a stone autobiography that would outlast your mortal body and continue to perform your sacred duties long after you had joined the gods in the sky. Your buildings were your voice, speaking your glory across the centuries. The world beyond Egypt's borders was not a distant abstraction. It was a vibrant, often tumultuous stage of rival kings, shifting alliances, and valuable resources, all requiring your careful attention. While your armies could project power, your most sophisticated tool for managing these relationships was diplomacy, a delicate art form you were expected to master from your earliest days on the throne. The palace was not just an Egyptian center of power, it was a hub of international affairs, a place where the scent of foreign perfumes mingled with the familiar smell of Kaifi incense, and the languages of a dozen distant lands echoed off the painted walls. Your introduction to this world began in the audience hall. Seated on your throne, as a stream of foreign delegations passed before you, you would watch, your expression a carefully practiced mask of divine serenity, as ambassadors from the great empires, the Hittites of Anatolia, the Babylonians of Mesopotamia, the Assyrians, and the Mitannians presented themselves. These men were not mere messengers. They were highly trained observers, skilled in protocol and espionage, sent to assess the strength and stability of your reign. They would deliver flowery speeches of brotherhood and peace, all the while studying you, the young pharaoh, noting every detail from the confidence of your vizier to the quality of the gold in your crown, gathering intelligence to report back to their own anxious sovereigns. The language of this international dialogue was not Egyptian, but Akkadian, the lingua franca of the ancient Near East, written in cuneiform script on clay tablets. Your scribes, masters of this foreign tongue, were your ears and voice in these exchanges. They would translate the words of the ambassadors for you and then carefully craft your replies on your behalf. Even as a child, you were taught the critical importance of tone and phrasing. A letter might begin with standard diplomatic greetings. Say to the king of Hatti, my brother, thus says the king of Egypt, your brother. All is well with me, with my houses, my wives, my sons, my officials, my horses, my chariots, and in my country, all is very well. But its true message lay in the subtle details that followed, a veiled threat or a carefully worded request that could alter the balance of power. The most tangible expressions of these relationships were the gifts, or more accurately, the formal exchanges of luxury goods that passed for diplomacy. A procession from the kingdom of Mitanni might bring you magnificent horses, prized for pulling your war chariots, their coats brushed to a shine. A delegation from the forests of Lebanon would present logs of fragrant cedar wood so massive it took teams of oxen to move them. From the distant Aegean, Keftiu Minon envoys might offer stunning raida, vessel cups in the shape of bulls' heads crafted from silver and gold, or intricate inlaid daggers. You learn that these were not simple tokens of friendship, they were strategic investments. By accepting them, you acknowledge the sender's status and open the door for trade agreements. In return, you were expected to send gifts of commensurate or greater value loads of Nubian gold, priceless ebony, and the fine linen Egypt was famous for. A lesser gift would be a grave insult, a sign of weakness or disrespect that could chill relations for years. For vassal states in Canaan and Nubia, the relationship was different. Their delegations did not come as equals, but as subjects paying homage. They brought tribute annual payments of goods and resources that affirmed their subservience to the Egyptian crown. This could include copper ingots, slaves, exotic animals for your menagerie, or the sons of local chieftains were taken into your court. This was a dual-purpose act. It served as a guarantee of their father's good behavior, and more importantly, it Egyptianized these young nobles. They grew up in your palace, learning your customs, language, and loyalty, so they could one day return to rule their own lands as dependable allies firmly within Egypt's sphere of influence. Perhaps the most profound lesson in statecraft came from observing the handling of a crisis. A frantic message might arrive from a Canaanite city-state, its ruler pleading for Egyptian troops to help repel attacking Hebrew warriors or a rival king. Your council would debate the request intensely, sending the army was a massive logistical undertaking and a risk. Would it be worth the cost? Would it deter other aggressors or invite further challenges? Alternatively, you could send a smaller contingent of Medjay police forces or simply a strongly worded missive to the attacker, a warning from the pharaoh that often carried enough weight to stop a conflict without ever drawing a sword. These decisions taught you that power was not just about having force, but about knowing when, how, and even if to use it. The most effective pharaoh was the one who could achieve his goals through the persuasive authority of his office, saving the blunt instrument of the army for when it was absolutely necessary. Your education included memorizing the complex web of alliances and rivalries that define the age. Your tutors used maps and clay tablet copies of old treaties to explain the shifting sands of international politics. You learned that the Hittites in the north were Egypt's primary rivals for control of Syria, while the rising power of Assyria was a threat to both. You understood that a strong alliance with Babylon could help keep the Hittites in check. This was a grand, continuous game of Senate played with real kingdoms, where a marriage alliance here could prevent a war there, and a timely shipment of gold could be the loyalty of a wavering vassal. Every decision was a calculated move on this global board, and the prosperity and security of the two lands depended on your ability to play it with wisdom and foresight, long before you were old enough to personally dictate a single word to a scribe. Amidst the grandeur of golden shrines and the clamor of military parades, one of the most constant and vital presences in your life would be the quiet, focused figure of the scribe. These men, easily identified by the palette and reed brushes tucked into their belts, were the human engines of your administration, the silent architects of your eternal memory. While priests mediated between you and the gods, and generals enforced your will, the scribes documented it all, transforming the fleeting moments of your reign into a permanent, unchanging record carved on temple walls and inked into precious papyrus scrolls. Their work was the glue that held the vast, complex machinery of the state together, and your ability to work with them was as crucial as any ritual you performed. Your relationship with these master wordsmiths began almost as soon as you could hold a brush. A senior scribe, a man of immense patience and learning, would be assigned as one of your primary tutors. Your lessons took place in a quiet, sunlit room within the palace, far from the distractions of the court. The first tools you learned were not weapons of war, but the instruments of record-keeping, the reed brush, the palette with its two wells for red and black ink, and a water pot for mixing. You practiced on flakes of limestone or broken pieces of pottery, learning the precise pressure and angle needed to form the elegant, picture-like symbols of the hieroglyphic script. This was a painstaking process, a physical discipline that taught you patience and an immense respect for the craft. A poorly drawn hieroglyph wasn't just a mistake, it could change the meaning of a word entirely, and in a religious text that was believed to risk cosmic consequences. As your skills grew, you learned that writing was not a single language but three. You mastered the formal, beautiful hieroglyphs for monumental inscriptions on stone, ensuring your name would be carved perfectly for eternity. You became fluent in the quicker, cursive hieratic script, used for religious texts, royal decrees, and important communications. You may have even learned the basics of Demotic, an even faster script used for administrative documents and everyday business. This literacy was your greatest practical power. It meant that when a report arrived from the governor of Kush or a dispatch from a general on the Levantine frontier, you were not dependent on a courtier's potentially biased summary. You could read the words yourself, seeing the situation through the scribe's own hand, discerning the subtle nuances and unspoken concerns that might be missed in a spoken report. The material they used was as unique as their skill. Papyrus, the precursor to paper, was a marvel of Egyptian ingenuity. You learned how it was made from the pith of the papyrus plant, cut into strips, cross-layered, pounded flat, and polished smooth, creating a strong, flexible, and incredibly durable writing surface. These sheets were then glued together into long scrolls that could stretch for meters, capable of holding the entire inventory of a temple's wealth or the detailed logs of a multi-year trading expedition. The scribe's ink, a soot-based black and an ochre-based red, was carried in solid cakes and mixed with water on the spot. The permanence of this medium was a constant reminder that your words, once committed to papyrus, became official, immutable history. A royal decree with your cartouche, sent to the four corners of your kingdom, carried the full weight of your authority, and it was the scribe's hand that gave it that power. These records were the lifeblood of your governance. Each day, scribes from the vizier's office would bring you scrolls detailing the state's accounts, the water level of the Nile at the various Nilometers, the expected yield of the harvest from each nome, the inventory of the state granaries, and the tax receipts collected in kind, so many sacks of grain, so many head of cattle, so many jars of honey. To rule effectively, you needed to understand the economy of your kingdom in granular detail. Was there a surplus that could fund a new building project? Was there a shortage in one region that required the redistribution of grain from another? This river of data, meticulously recorded by armies of scribes, allowed you to make informed decisions that affected the lives of millions. It transformed the abstract concept of kingship into the practical management of resources, teaching you that a full granary was a greater sign of mad than a chest full of captured gold. Beyond the dry numbers, the scribes were also your chief propagandists and historians. They composed the glorious accounts of your military victories, the texts that would be carved on temple pylons for all to see. In these official annals, you were always the towering, godlike hero, personally smiting a dozen foes with each swing of your khopesh. They drafted the hymns you would recite in the temple, the prayers that ensured the sun's rising and the Nile's flooding. They also kept the sacred texts, the collections of spells from the Book of the Dead and the intricate astronomical charts that predicted the movements of the stars. Consulting these ancient scrolls with your priest scribes was a critical part of your decision-making process. Before launching a campaign or beginning a construction project, you would seek omens and prophecies within these texts, believing that divine wisdom was encoded in their carefully copied words. The scribes were your bridge to the knowledge of the past, ensuring that the rituals of your grandfathers were performed with the exact same precision in your own time. Ultimately, the work of the scribes was your guarantee of immortality. They were the ones ensuring that your name, your deeds, and your offerings to the gods would be remembered for all time. Every statue inscribed with your cartouche, every temple wall depicting your coronation, every stela proclaiming your generosity, all of it was born in the mind of a scribe and transferred to the stone by a scribe artist. They understood the magical power of the written word, that to record an act was to make it eternal, to repeat a name was to keep its owner alive in the netherworld. In the quiet scratch of their reed brushes, you could hear the sound of your own legacy being written, a permanent testament to your reign that would echo long after your voice had fallen silent. Despite the gilded perfection of your public image, the reality of your rule was a constant, delicate dance on a knife's edge. Your divinity was a shield, but it was not invincible armor. The same court that knelt before you also housed ambitious nobles, powerful priests, and military commanders whose loyalty was conditional, tested daily by the temptation of power. A child on the Horus throne was inherently a destabilizing force, a vacuum that lesser men sought to fill. Your most immediate and intimate danger came from within your own palace walls. A disgruntled uncle or a jealous cousin, their own claim to the throne bolstered by a faction of wealthy supporters, could weave a web of conspiracy right under your nose. Their methods would be subtle, a whispered doubt about your regent's advice planted in the ear of a general, a strategically timed rumor about your health spread among the temple priests, or a bribed servant in the kitchen. Your protection lay in the vigilance of your inner circle, your mother's sharp political instincts, the vizier's network of informants, and the unwavering loyalty of your personal guards, the mejai, whose fierce devotion was purchased not just with gold, but with honor and privilege. Beyond the hushed conspiracies of the court lay the ever-present threat of foreign invasion, a test of your divine mandate that could shatter the illusion of stability. News would arrive by swift riverboat or fast-running messenger, their reports causing a visible tension to ripple through the council chamber. The Libyans might be massing on the western border, testing the fortifications you had never seen. Or worse, the dreaded Sea Peoples, a confederation of mysterious seafaring warriors, could be raiding the delta coasts, their advanced weaponry and ferocity threatening to overwhelm local garrisons. These were not just military problems, they were theological crises. Every incursion by a foreign army was a manifestation of isfet, chaos, directly challenging your power to maintain mat. A victory would be celebrated as a divine affirmation, your name sung in temples across the land, but a defeat, or even a protracted, costly war, would be seen as a sign that the gods were displeased with your rule, eroding the very foundation of your authority and encouraging your domestic enemies to make their move. Perhaps the most insidious threats were those you could not fight with soldiers or outmaneuver with politics. Famine and plague, a series of low Nile floods could lead to failed harvests, emptying the state granaries that were the bedrock of your economy and your people's survival. As hunger spread through the villages, your subjects would stop seeing you as their divine provider and start seeing you as a failed intermediary. Desperate people are not loyal subjects, they are a tinderbox of rebellion. Similarly, a rampant disease sweeping through the crowded cities along the river would be interpreted as a cleansing punishment from an angry god. Priests would scrutinize your every recent ritual for a misstep or mispronounced incantation that might have caused the divine wrath. In these moments of existential crisis, you would be forced to perform acts of very public penitence, leading extraordinary processions, making lavish offerings, and commissioning new temples to publicly restore the covenant between the king and the gods and reassure a terrified populace. Your youth was your greatest vulnerability, a fact starkly illustrated by the truncated reign of the boy King Tutankhamun. His rule was almost certainly dominated by his elder regents, Ai and Hormheb, and his sudden death as a teenager exposed the brittle nature of a dynasty reliant on a child. It created a frantic and potentially violent scramble for succession, where the ambitions of powerful courtiers could override the wishes of the deceased king. Your own survival depended on a multifaceted strategy of protection. Physically, you were guarded at all times by a rotation of trusted bodyguards. Your food and drink were tasted, your linens were inspected, and your movements were carefully controlled. Politically, your regent would work to create a balance of power among the elite, ensuring no single faction grew strong enough to challenge you. This often meant playing nobles against each other, granting favors to secure loyalty, and strategically marrying you into powerful families to bind their interests to your own. The most profound strategy, however, was psychological, the relentless reinforcement of your divinity through art and architecture. By commissioning statues, temples, and obelisks in your name, your supporters were not just building monuments, they were building reality. The more your image as a powerful, adult-sized god was carved into the very stone of Egypt, the more immutable that truth became in the minds of your people. It was a preemptive strike against doubt, a way to project an image of unchallengeable strength to mask the reality of a child on the throne. Every smiting scene on a temple pylon, every colossal statue of you seated serenely beside the gods, was a piece of political propaganda designed to deter would-be usurpers and assure the masses that Maat was intact. Your reign was a performance on the world's most dangerous stage, and your survival depended on ensuring the audience never saw anything but the radiant, invincible God-King you were destined to be. Even as you navigated the complex currents of court politics and international diplomacy, a parallel and equally profound journey was unfolding, one that looked beyond the horizon of your earthly reign toward an eternal destiny. From the moment you took the throne, your mortality was not a hidden truth, but a central fact of your existence, meticulously planned for with the same precision as any military campaign or temple construction. The preparation for your afterlife was not a morbid preoccupation. It was the ultimate expression of your divine duty, a continuous project that would span your entire reign and ensure your transformation from a mortal ruler into an immortal god, forever presiding alongside Osiris and Ra in the field of Reed. The first and most critical step in this eternal project was the selection and creation of your tomb. Unlike the towering pyramids of your old kingdom ancestors, your eternal house would be a secret subterranean palace hidden deep within the cliffs of the Valley of the King. This remote, sun-baked wadi on the west bank of Thebes, the domain of the setting sun and the dead, was chosen for its isolation and ease of guarding. You would be taken there early in your reign, accompanied by your chief architect and the high priest of Ammon, to choose the perfect location. The chief artisan of the royal necropolis, a man who held the sacred title, servant in the place of truth, would present you with plans carved on a limestone flake. The tomb's design was a mirror of the underworld itself, a long, descending corridor symbolizing the journey of the sun god through the 12 hours of night, leading to a series of pillared halls and finally to the burial chamber where your sarcophagus would rest. This was not merely a digging project, it was an act of reverse creation, carving a sacred space out of the chaotic mountain to serve as your womb of rebirth. Within your treasury, another team of master craftsmen was already at work on the objects that would accompany you. Artisans skilled in working gold, silver, and electrum would be crafting your innermost coffins. These were not simple boxes, but masterpieces of theological art. The first, innermost coffin would be shaped in your exact likeness, crafted from beaten gold, your face serene, and hands crossed over your chest holding the crook and flail. Your eyes would be inlaid with obsidian and quartz, giving you a piercing, eternal gaze. This coffin would be nestled inside two larger, wooden ones, each overlaid with gold leaf and painted with protective deities like the winged Isis and Nephthys. The symbolism was precise. The gold represented the flesh of the gods, imperishable and radiant, transforming your mortal remains into a divine and eternal vessel. Simultaneously, teams of scribes and artists in the House of Life, the scriptorium attached to the great temple, were compiling your personal funerary text. For you, a pharaoh, this would be a customized version of the Amjuat, the book of that which is in the underworld, and other sacred texts like the Book of Gates. These were not books as we know them, but long, beautifully illustrated papyrus scrolls or paintings that would cover the walls of your tomb. They served as a literal guidebook and a magical passport for your journey. Each hour of the night was depicted with its own challenges. Demon serpents like the monstrous Apep that had to be defeated, gates guarded by fearsome deities whose names you had to know to pass, and watery realms you had to navigate in the sun god's bark. You would review these designs, ensuring the spells were correctly copied and the illustrations captured your triumphant passage. Memorizing these texts became part of your education. You needed to know the path and its perils by heart long before your Ka, your spiritual double, would have to walk it. The gathering of treasures for your tomb was a continuous, state-sponsored endeavor. Every trading expedition, military campaign, and diplomatic gift served a dual purpose, enriching your kingdom in life and stocking your eternal palace in death. Alabaster jars were filled with sacred oils for your anointing. Chests were packed with finely pleated linen robes, and game boards of ebony and ivory were crafted for your entertainment. A full suite of furniture, beds, chairs, chariots, and even a portable throne were designed to be disassembled and placed in the tomb. Your personal weapons, from your ceremonial dagger to your favorite bow, were refurbished and prepared for the journey. Each item was chosen not only for its beauty and value, but for its function in the afterlife. These were not mere symbols. The Egyptians believed that through the power of ritual and the correct funerary spells, these objects would be made real and usable in the world to come, allowing you to live in comfort and style for all eternity. Perhaps the most intimate and spiritually significant artifacts created were the shabdis, the small mummiform figurines that would do your work in the afterlife. As a pharaoh, you would be entitled to hundreds, if not thousands, of these servant statues. Crafted from faience, wood, or stone, each was inscribed with a specific spell from the Book of the Dead. O Shabdi, if I am called upon, if I am assigned to any work to be done there in the God's land, you shall say, here I am, and you shall do it for me. They were equipped with tiny stone hoes and baskets, ready to the fields of the afterlife, so you would never have to perform manual labor. You might even have a set of overseer shabdis holding whips to manage the others. Reviewing these vast armies of miniature workers was a strange and powerful reminder that even in death, your role as a ruler and organizer of labor would continue. Your involvement in this process was active and deeply personal. You would participate in key rituals long before your death, such as the opening of the mouth ceremony performed on your statues. This ritual, using a ceremonial adze to touch the mouth, eyes, and ears of a statue, was believed to animate it, allowing it to serve as a receptacle for your ka to receive offerings. By performing this on your own funerary statues, you were ensuring your eternal sustenance. This constant engagement with your own mortality profoundly shaped your perspective on life. It was a daily meditation on the temporary nature of your earthly power and the infinite scope of your divine responsibility. The knowledge that your reign was but a prelude to an eternal existence could be a comfort, but it also added an immense weight to every decision. Every temple you built, every law you upheld, every act of mat you performed was not just for the present, but was a deposit in your spiritual account, a deed that would be weighed against the feather of truth on the scales of Osiris. Your life was a continuous rehearsal for a death that was not an end, but your greatest and most glorious coronation. And so, the days of your reign, each one a meticulously performed ritual of duty and divinity, would inevitably draw to a close. But in the world of the pharaohs, a life's end was not an exit. It was the final, most critical act of statecraft, the moment your carefully constructed legacy was either secured for eternity or cast into oblivion. The monuments you built, the policies you enacted, even the mere fact of your survival, all of it was raw material for the historians of the future, both ancient and modern, who would sift through the evidence to decide who you truly were, a great king, a forgotten placeholder, or a tragic footnote. Your legacy began the moment your heart was stilled, and the embalmers began their sacred work. The official court narrative, crafted by the very scribes who had served you, would be a masterpiece of propaganda. Annals would be composed celebrating your wisdom and strength, attributing every success of your reign to your divine will. The temples you built would stand as eternal proof of your piety, their walls telling a story of a ruler in perfect harmony with the gods. This was the history you intended to leave behind, a permanent record carved in stone that proclaimed your unwavering maintenance of Mat. But this was only one version of the story. The true, messy, human reality of your reign, the guidance of your regent, the political compromises, the childhood uncertainties would be carefully edited out, hidden behind the idealized image of the serene, all-powerful God-King. The fragility of this manufactured legacy was terrifyingly real. In the volatile world of Egyptian succession, the next pharaoh held the power to rewrite the past. If your policies were unpopular or your family line was overthrown, your memory could be systematically erased from history in a practice known as damnatio memoriae. Your statues could be defaced, your elegant features hammered into anonymity. Your name, painstakingly carved inside its protective cartouche, could be chiseled away from temple walls and obelisks. Your tomb could be robbed, not just for its gold, but to disperse your spiritual essence and prevent you from achieving immortality. To be forgotten was a fate worse than death, a second, final death of the soul. Your entire afterlife depended on people remembering your name and making offerings to your ka. To have that name obliterated was to truly cease to exist. For centuries, many child pharaohs suffered this fate, their stories lost to the sand. Then, in November 1922, a single discovery changed everything. Howard Carter's candlelight glimpse into the nearly intact tomb of Tutankhamun did more than reveal unimaginable treasures. It pierced the veil of official state history and revealed the poignant humanity behind the golden mask. Here was no towering, invincible giant, but the burial of a young man. His tomb was smaller, almost rushed, suggesting a sudden, unexpected death. Among the glittering grave goods were more intimate items: a simple linen bag containing locks of his grandmother's hair, a small box perhaps holding a childhood keepsake, and a wreath of faded flowers, likely placed on his coffin by a grieving relative. This was not just the funeral of a king, it was the burial of a son, a husband, a boy who had barely reached adulthood. The modern scientific examination of his mummy added even deeper layers to his story. CT scans revealed a young body afflicted with a clubbed foot, requiring him to use over 100 canes found in his tomb. He had suffered a recently broken leg and was fighting a severe case of malaria at the time of his death. The image of the frail, sickly teenager struggling to perform the demanding physical rituals of kingship, the ceremonial runs, the chariot driving, is a powerful corrective to the muscle-bound hero depicted on his temple walls. Tutankhamun's legacy is no longer defined by grand military victories or massive building projects, which were modest. Instead, his impact lies in his humanity. He has become the eternal symbol of youth and lost potential, a window into the immense personal burden shouldered by every child who wore the double crown. Your own impact, however, could have been far more direct and transformative. Imagine you were a ruler like the young Pharaoh Pepi II, who is said to have ascended the throne at the tender age of 6 and then ruled for an astonishing 94 years. Such an incredibly long reign, even if its early decades were guided by regents, would have provided a rare and profound stability. Your personal preferences, your devotion to a particular god, your artistic taste would have had nearly a century to seep into the very culture of Egypt, influencing everything from architectural styles to religious rituals. A child pharaoh who lived into old age didn't just reign. They became an institution, a living bridge between generations, their own life story becoming synonymous with the nation's history. Alternatively, your reign could have been a pivotal restoration like that of Tutankhamun. Guided by your advisors, you could have been the face of a great counter-reformation, healing the divisions caused by a predecessor like Akhenaten. Your decree to restore the old gods, to reopen the temples, and to return the court to Thebes would have been a political masterstroke that stabilized a fractured kingdom. In this scenario, your legacy isn't one of personal innovation, but of healing and a return to tradition, a crucial, if conservative, act that allowed Egyptian civilization to endure for another millennium. Your impact would be measured in continuity, in the peace and stability you preserved rather than the wars you won. Ultimately, your story does not end with the closing of your tomb. It continues in the work of the archaeologists who piece together the fragments of your life, the historians who interpret the motives behind your decrees, and the millions of people who walk through museum halls and feel a connection across the millennia to the child who ruled as a god. The artifacts you left behind, a scarab ring, a faded piece of linen, a hastily written note on a piece of pottery, are messages from the past, waiting to be read. They tell us that behind the gold and the grandeur, there was a real person, a child who learned, who played, who struggled, and who dreamed. Your legacy is a dual one, the towering, eternal figure carved on the temple walls, and the vulnerable, very human child hidden within. It is a reminder that history is not just about grand events and official records, but about the enduring, deeply relatable human experiences of duty, love, sacrifice, and the universal desire to be remembered. To truly understand the weight of the crown you would wear, we need to move beyond the general and step into the specific, into the lives of the boys who actually lived this reality. The historical record gives us several poignant examples, but none more famous or more human than Tutankhamun. Imagine him not as the golden mask, but as a 9-year-old boy thrust onto the throne of a kingdom in crisis. His father, the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, had torn Egypt's religious foundation apart by abandoning the traditional gods to worship solely the Aten, the sun disk. The royal court had been moved to a brand new, isolated capital city, Akhetaten, and the powerful priesthood of Amun had been stripped of its wealth and influence. The entire nation was spiritually adrift and politically fractured. This was the broken world Tutankhamun inherited. His every move for the next decade would be a careful act of reconstruction, guided by the steady hands of his regents, the elder vizier I and the general Hormheb. His very name was changed from Tutankhaten, which means living image of the Aten, to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, a powerful signal that the old gods were returning. Every decree issued in his name, every temple reopened, every offering restored to the priests of Amun, was a step toward healing the divide. He was the perfect face for this restoration, a young, pious king, seemingly guided by the gods themselves to bring back the ancient ways. Yet, we now know this young ruler bore physical burdens to match his political ones. CT scans of his mummy reveal a boy plagued with health issues, including a clubbed left foot that would have caused him pain and required the use of a cane, over 100 of which were found in his tomb. He also had a cleft palate and suffered from multiple bouts of malaria. The idealized images on his temple walls show a strong, athletic youth smiting his enemies, but the reality was a frail teenager who needed help to walk, performing the demanding rituals of kingship under the scorching Egyptian sun. His death around the age of 18 or 19 was sudden, and his burial, though lavish, was rushed, crammed into a small tomb likely intended for someone else. The story of Tutankhamun is not one of great military conquest or monumental building projects. It is a story of a sickly child used as a symbol to restore order, a boy who navigated impossible pressures until his body simply gave out. For a different perspective, we can look to the other end of the spectrum with Pharaoh Pepi II, who is said to have ascended the throne around the age of 6, and then ruled for an astonishing 94 years. If his reign length is accurate, it presents a fascinating contrast. His early years would have been similarly dominated by regents, likely his mother Queen Pepi II and his uncle. A famous story, perhaps apocryphal but wonderfully illustrative, survives from his youth. It is recorded that a governor named Harkuf returned from an expedition to Nubia with a pygmy as a gift for the young king. Upon hearing the news, the boy pharaoh was so overcome with excitement that he sent a meticulously detailed letter instructing Harkuf to take every imaginable precaution to protect this living curiosity on his journey north. He wrote, "My Majesty desires to see this pygmy more than the gifts of the Mine country and of Punt. When he comes down with you into the vessel, get worthy men to be around him on deck, lest he fall into the water. When he lies down at night, get worthy men to lie around him in his tent. Inspect 10 times at night." This outburst of childish excitement, preserved on the wall of Harkuf's tomb, gives us a rare and precious glimpse of the boy behind the crown, a moment of unfiltered wonder that somehow made it through the layers of formal bureaucracy. However, his incredibly long reign also serves as a cautionary tale. While the first half of his rule was likely stable and prosperous, evidence suggests that as he grew into an old man, his grip on power weakened. The central government's authority began to crumble, and regional governors became increasingly powerful and independent, ultimately leading to the collapse of the Old Kingdom and the onset of the First Intermediate Period, a dark age of fragmentation and chaos. Pepi's story shows us that a reign that began with a child's curiosity could, through its sheer length, end in the gradual dissolution of the very state he was sworn to protect. These two historical figures, Tutankhamun and Pepi II, act as powerful bookends to the experience of a child pharaoh. One ruled for a brief, turbulent decade, the other for a near mythical century. One was physically frail, the other evidently robust enough to survive into extreme old age. One is famous for the spectacular discovery of his tomb, the other for the length of his reign and its eventual consequence. Yet both shared the same fundamental reality: their childhoods were not their own. Their wills were subordinate to the agendas of powerful adults who stood behind their thrones. Their daily lives were a blend of rigorous education, intense ritual obligation, and careful political performance. Their bodies, whether weak or strong, were vessels of the state's stability. Examining their lives allows us to replace our mythologized image of all-powerful god-kings with something far more relatable and profound: the image of a child shouldering a burden they did not choose, navigating a world of unimaginable pressure and splendor, and leaving behind a legacy that was often shaped more by the adults in the room than by their own youthful hand. Their artifacts, Tutankhamun's walking canes, Pepi's excited letter about a pygmy, are the clues that help us piece together the human story behind the golden masks and official chronicles, reminding us that divinity is a heavy costume for anyone to wear, but especially for a child. We've painted a vivid picture of the gilded cage, the relentless education, and the sacred duties that define the existence of a child pharaoh. But to truly step into those small, sandaled feet, we must first clear away the stubborn myths that popular culture has built around this extraordinary life. The Hollywood image is one of a tiny tyrant, lounging on a throne while slaves fan him with palm leaves, issuing whimsical commands that send armies marching and pyramids rising overnight. The reality, as you would have experienced every single day, was a far more complex and constrained existence, a delicate balance between celestial authority and very earthly powerlessness. The most pervasive misconception is that of absolute, unchecked power, the idea that as a living god, your every whispered word became an immutable law, is a dramatic fantasy. In truth, your divine will was a carefully managed resource, channeled and interpreted by the powerful adults who surrounded you. Imagine wanting to simply choose your own meal. That decision would first be vetted by your royal physicians for its health properties, by your taster for safety, and by the chief steward to ensure its ingredients were available and appropriately luxurious for your station. A desire to play in the garden longer might be overruled by a priest reminding you of a mandatory sunset ritual you were already late for. Your commands were often just your ceremonial approval of decisions that had already been debated and settled by your regent and the council of viziers. Your signature, your cartouche, was the final seal of authority, but the document itself was usually placed before you with the expectation of a swift, unquestioning assent. Your power was vast in theory, but in daily practice, it was heavily curated and circumscribed. This leads directly to another myth, the concept of endless, carefree luxury. While your surroundings were undeniably opulent, every aspect of that luxury served a ritualistic or political purpose. Yes, you slept on a golden bed, but it was a state bed, a piece of ceremonial furniture. You wore the finest linen, but it was prescribed for you, and its stark, pure white was a symbol of your divinity, not a fashion choice. You ate delicacies, but your diet was a performance of the kingdom's bounty, monitored for your health and sanctity. This was not indulgence, it was obligation. The weight of your gold collar was not just a display of wealth, but a constant, physical reminder of the economic system you were bound to uphold. The luxury was for the office you held, not for you, the child. There was little room for personal preference or spontaneous joy in this curated existence. The portrayal of the priesthood as merely subservient chanters is another dramatic oversimplification. The priesthood, particularly the high priests of powerful cults like that of Ammon, were not your employees, they were your partners, and at times your superiors in terms of practical influence. You relied on them completely to perform the rituals that maintained Maat, and they controlled the vast temple economies that rivaled the state's own wealth. A displeased priesthood could subtly undermine your authority by hinting at divine disfavor, a dangerous whisper that could ripple through the population and destabilize your reign. They were the keepers of the sacred scripts, the experts in the precise words and gestures that pleased the gods. Your divinity was confirmed and sustained through their ceremonies. This made them indispensable, and a savvy child pharaoh learned to respect and collaborate with them, understanding that their power was deeply entwined with his own. Perhaps the most human misconception is about your relationships. Films show a child pharaoh ordering adults about with impunity. The truth was often the reverse. You were constantly surrounded by adults whose loyalty was conditional, tutors correcting you, priests guiding you, courtiers flattering you for their own gain. Who could you truly trust? Your mother, the great royal wife, was likely your most fierce protector, but even her guidance was filtered through the lens of political necessity. Your playmates were the children of nobles, chosen for their lineage, not for their friendship. Every relationship had a layer of political calculation beneath it. The unconditional love and simple, honest interactions of a normal childhood were likely the rarest and most precious commodities in your entire world, making moments of genuine connection all the more profound and memorable. Finally, the notion that your life was one of constant, thrilling drama is upended by the sheer, grinding routine of it all. For every grand festival like the Opet, there were 100 days of identical, monotonous ritual. The same hymns chanted at the same time each morning, the same offerings presented in the same way in the same dim temple chambers, the same lessons with the same tutors. The machinery of state and religion ran on routine, and as its central cog, you were expected to perform your part with flawless, unwavering consistency. The stability of Egypt depended on this predictability. Your life was less a series of epic adventures and more a sacred, never-ending performance where forgetting your lines wasn't just a mistake, it was a potential cosmic crisis. The reality of being a child pharaoh was less about the explosive moments of power and more about the immense, quiet weight of eternal responsibility, a burden carried on small shoulders from the moment you woke until the moment you were finally allowed to rest. The moment of your transition was not a single event, but a slow, deliberate dawning of authority, a shift in the very air of the court that you could feel as you entered your early teen. The adults who had once whispered instructions now offered counsel with a subtle tilt of their heads, their eyes searching yours for the first glimmers of your own will. This was the beginning of the most delicate dance of your life, the reclamation of the power that had always been your divine right, but had been held in trust by those who now might be reluctant to let it go. The regent, whether your mother or the vizier, had grown accustomed to the weight of the crook and flail in all but name. Your challenge was to take them back without appearing ungrateful, without causing a rift that could shatter the stability of the two lands. It required a new kind of lesson, one not found on any papyrus scroll, the art of political grace combined with unyielding resolve. This evolving power was formalized and celebrated through one of the most ancient and significant rituals of kingship, the Hebsed festival. Unlike your first coronation, which was an overwhelming whirlwind of transformation, the Hebsed was a public test and a reaffirmation. Held traditionally after 30 years of rule, it was often moved forward for a young pharaoh who had started as a child, symbolically marking your coming of age and your renewed physical and spiritual vigor. The entire nation would gather for this jubilee, a vast, roaring sea of humanity, eager to witness their god-king prove his mettle. The centerpiece was the ritual run, a course you had to complete between markers symbolizing the borders of Egypt. As a teenager, your body now strong from years of military training, this is no longer a breathless struggle, but a powerful, confident sprint. Each footfall on the sacred ground was a declaration of your vitality, a promise to the people that their living God was in his prime, bursting with the energy to ensure bountiful harvests and vanquish all enemies. You were not just running a course, you were running the kingdom, and everyone watching knew it. Following the run, you would be presented with new sets of ritual objects and crowns, a second coronation that felt profoundly different from the first. You understood the weight and meaning of each symbol now. When the heavy double crown was placed upon your head, you accepted its burden with conscious intent, not passive ceremony. You received new crooks and flails, artifacts that were yours alone, not hand-me-downs or a regent's guidance. You then made offerings to the gods from your own hand, speaking the prayers with a voice that had deepened and with an authority that now came from within. The entire festival was a massive piece of political theater, but for you, it was deeply personal. It was your formal graduation from a figurehead to a sovereign, a nationwide announcement that the period of guardianship was over. The gods had tested you and found you worthy, and the people cheered not for a child, but for a king. Yet behind the public jubilation, the real work of establishing your independence was just beginning. A regent who had wielded power for a decade did not simply bow and fade into the background. Court factions that had benefited from the regency would test your resolve, presenting you with minor disputes or outdated protocols to see if you would rubber stamp their wishes or think for yourself. Your first independent decree, perhaps an adjustment to the grain tax in a struggling nome, or the appointment of a new governor from outside the traditional noble families, would be scrutinized for signs of weakness or innovation. This was where your childhood education became your greatest weapon. You had spent years observing the vizier manage crises. Now you could apply those lessons, perhaps surprising your council by recalling a similar situation from 5 years prior and questioning why a different approach wasn't being considered. Your unique perspective, forged in the silence of observation rather than the heat of action, allowed you to see patterns and solutions they might have missed. The leadership style you developed was inevitably a tapestry woven from the threads of your unique childhood experiences. A pharaoh who had known isolation might place a higher value on loyal, personal companions, elevating capable commoners to positions of authority and creating a new power base outside the old noble families. Another, who had felt suffocated by protocol, might streamline court ceremonies to focus on efficiency and military readiness. Your relationship with the priesthood, so carefully managed by your regents, would now be yours to define. Would you continue to generously endow the temples of Amun, or would you, like some kings before you, seek to subtly check their growing political influence by promoting the cult of a different god like Ptah or Ra? Every decision you made, from commissioning your first solo building project to leading your first military campaign, was filtered through the lens of your formative years, a constant process of embracing or rejecting the legacy of the adults who had shaped your world. This evolution from a symbol to a strategist was the final, crucial chapter of your journey. The child who had been taught to suppress emotion now learned to harness passion into conviction. The boy who had memorized the paths of the underworld now charted the treacherous paths of international diplomacy. The teenager who had practiced archery in the courtyard now aimed the entire military might of Egypt at its enemies. You were no longer just the mediator between the people and the gods. You were the architect of the nation's destiny, drawing on a deep well of experience that few other rulers ever possessed. You had seen the engine of state from the inside, understood its every gear and lever, and now your hand was finally on the throttle. The reign that followed was truly your own, a testament to the fact that the most challenging apprenticeship in human history could forge a ruler of unparalleled depth and understanding. Your divine presence was not confined to the political and spiritual realms. It was a vibrant, pulsing force that shaped the very soul of Egyptian culture, weaving your image into the fabric of daily life and eternal art. From the moment you took the throne, a vast, state-sponsored machine of creativity whirred into motion, its sole purpose to translate your celestial authority into tangible forms that could be seen, heard, and felt by every subject in the two lands. This was not mere decoration, it was a sophisticated tool of statecraft, a continuous broadcast of power designed to reinforce your divinity, ensure cultural unity, and leave an indelible mark on the aesthetic identity of your era. As a child pharaoh, your unique story became a powerful new muse, inspiring artists to break from tradition even as they upheld its most sacred conventions. The most immediate and pervasive artworks were your official portraits. Sculptors in the royal workshops faced a fascinating challenge: how to depict a child with the authority of a god. Their solution was a masterful blend of idealized power and subtle humanity. In colossal statues carved from red granite or diorite, you were shown with the broad shoulders and muscular torso of an adult king, seated firmly upon the throne, the double crown of Egypt upon your head. This was the official image, the unshakable pillar of strength. Yet in more intimate sculptures, perhaps a smaller statue intended for a private shrine within the palace, the artist might allow a hint of youthful softness to remain in the cheeks, or a slightly more delicate frame, a quiet acknowledgement of your true age that made the depiction of power all the more poignant. These weren't just statues, they were receptacles for your ka, your spiritual double. Through the opening of the mouth ceremony, they were believed to be brought to life, allowing you to inhabit them and receive offerings for all eternity. They were placed in temples across Egypt, ensuring that your divine gaze, frozen in stone, watched over your kingdom forever. This same duality played out on the painted walls of your temples and tombs. Here, you were not a subject of art, but the central actor in a divine drama. Artists followed a strict canon of proportion, but within those rules, they found ways to tell your specific story. In vast reliefs, you were depicted as a giant, towering over foreign chieftains whose necks you grasped in the classic smiting pose, a symbol of your role as the protector of Maat from the chaos of outside forces. Yet, in scenes showing you learning from your tutors or being guided by a goddess like Hathor, your size relative to the adult figures could be more natural, placing you in a narrative of guidance and growth. Every detail was symbolic. The color of your skin, often a bold red ochre for men, signified your vitality and exposure to the sun god Ra. The regalia you held, the crook, the flail, the ankh, were not just props but dense packages of meaning, communicating your roles as shepherd, provider, and possessor of life. Your image was a language everyone could read, a constant visual reminder of the cosmic order you upheld. Your patronage extended to the realm of sound, where musicians and poets composed hymns that were your reign's soundtrack. These were not simple songs of praise, but complex theological works, performed by temple choirs and orchestras of harps, lutes, and sistrums during important rituals. A hymn might describe your birth as a cosmic event, aligning you with the rising of Sirius or the journey of the sunbark. It would detail your victories not as military achievements of a boy, but as preordained triumphs of divine will. The foreign lands come to you, bowing their heads. The singers would chant, their voices echoing through columned halls. They kiss the earth before your majesty. These compositions served a dual purpose. They flattered you, the living God, and they reinforced the state religion, weaving your narrative into the broader tapestry of myth. Your name, repeated in rhythmic verses, became a magical invocation, a spoken monument as enduring as any stone statue. Even as a child, your personal preferences could send ripples through the royal workshops, subtly shifting aesthetic trends. If you developed a fondness for a particular type of lotus blossom, jewelers might quickly incorporate that flower into new designs for broad collars and pectorals. A fascination with the exotic wildlife brought as tribute from Nubia could inspire a new theme in palace frescoes, with monkeys scrambling up papyrus stalks and giraffes with impossibly long necks. The artisans of Deir el-Medina, the village that housed the tomb builders and craftsmen, were masters of their trade, capable of incredible innovation within the strict boundaries of tradition. They might experiment with new shades of glass for your inlay jewelry, or develop a more fluid style for depicting hunting scenes in your private chambers. While the official art for public consumption remained timeless and idealized, the objects created for your daily life could reflect a more contemporary and personal taste, offering a rare glimpse of the individual behind the crown. This cultural output was the glue that held the empire together. For a farmer in the Delta, a pilgrimage to Thebes to see your image on the towering pylons of Karnak was a transformative experience. It cemented your divinity in his mind and connected him to the central power of the state. The hymns sung in local temples, though performed by lesser priests, were the same ones composed for you, creating a shared cultural and religious experience across hundreds of miles. The art you sponsored defined what it meant to be Egyptian during your reign, creating a common visual language of power, piety, and prosperity. By surrounding your people with images of your strength and generosity, you fostered a sense of shared identity and purpose, making the abstract concept of the state feel immediate, personal, and divinely ordained. Your cultural legacy, therefore, was not a side effect of your rule. It was one of its most powerful engines, a force that shaped hearts and minds as surely as any decree from the throne. So as the sun sets over the Nile, casting long shadows across the limestone columns of your palace, we're left to reflect on a life that is perhaps the greatest paradox in history. You were both the most powerful person in the kingdom and the least free, a living god who couldn't choose his own breakfast, a sovereign whose every playmate was a political calculation. Your story is not one of simple, untrammeled power, but a delicate and heartbreaking dance between the celestial and the deeply, profoundly human. You held the crook and flail, symbols of a shepherd's care and a judge's stern authority, in hand that still yearned to toss a ball or hold a toy. You wore the weight of a gold and lapis lazuli broad collar, a masterpiece of artistry that was also a physical anchor to your duty, a constant reminder that you belonged not to yourself, but to the entire civilization of Egypt. This journey through your days, from the overwhelming sensory spectacle of your coronation to the quiet, hidden moments of play with a cherished pet monkey in the garden, reveals a truth far more fascinating than any myth of absolute power. It shows us that history is not made by icons of stone, but by people. It was a real child who had to memorize those complex hymns, who felt a flutter of nervousness before the ritual run, who perhaps lay awake at night in a gilded bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering about the immense destiny they were born to fulfill. The weight of the crown was literal and immense, but the weight of expectation was infinitely heavier, a constant pressure to suppress the natural impulses of youth in favor of the serene, unchanging facade of divinity. What truly endures, then, is not just the gold of Tutankhamun's mask or the sheer scale of the temples, but this stunningly relatable human struggle. It's a legacy etched not only in hieroglyphs, but in the universal language of growing up, of navigating the expectations of family and society, and of searching for your own voice in a world that has already written your script. The child pharaohs of Egypt captivate us because they are a magnified, dazzling reflection of a challenge we all face: the journey to define ourselves within the roles we are given. Their world was one of unimaginable splendor and equally unimaginable pressure, a combination that feels both utterly alien and strangely familiar. They remind us that behind every great title, every grand monument, and every line in a history book, there was a person. A person who laughed, who learned, who loved, and who likely felt, at times, incredibly alone. Their stories bridge the vast chasm of millennia, connecting us to the past not through dates and battles, but through shared humanity. So the next time you see this serene stone face of a pharaoh, look a little closer. See the child who was tasked with holding the world together, and remember the incredible, beautiful, and heartbreaking weight of a crown placed upon a head that was still too small for it. What part of this impossible, magnificent life resonates most with you? Share your thoughts below, and if you want to continue exploring the people behind the history, make sure to subscribe for our next journey into the mysteries of the ancient world.